السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أيها الأحباب، سنعيش مع أعظم مقطع في الرد على الكفار من كبار قادة الحضارة العالمية، فانتبهوا وركزوا معنا في هذا المقطع الخطير والمهم عالميا. نقول وبالله التوفيق. عندما أيقن الراسخين في العلوم الكونية العلماء الكبار خالص أن الكون نشأ من العدم، بل هو في وجوده مكافئ للعدم، كما بينا في مقاطع عديدة على فيس وقناة الدكتور حسين اللبيدي، ارجعوا إليها. ولأن العقل يوقن بأن العدم لا يعطي وجود بديع يترقى إلى هدف غايته الكمال، فإن ذلك سيقود القلب، العقل يعني القلب، لليقين بوجود خلاق له صفات الكمال من فوق ذلك الكون البديع العظيم. وتلك النتيجة العلمية أغضبت كفار الحضارة العالمية، أغضبتهم، فراحوا يلفقون حلول باطلة. يعني لما هذه هدت الركن من أركان الكفر بتاعهم، فبدأوا يلفقون أمور باطلة. فها هو كبيرهم المشلول هوكينج، الذي يوصف بأنه من أكبر علماء الفيزياء بعد أينشتاين، أكبر علماء الفيزياء على مستوى العالم كله، يقول بأن ذلك الكون ذو التصميم العظيم خرج بالصدفة من العدم، كما سنشاهد.
So when people ask me if a God created the universe, I tell them that the question itself makes no sense. Time didn't exist before the Big Bang, so there is no time for God to make the universe in. It's like asking for directions to the edge of the Earth. The Earth is a sphere, it doesn't have an edge, so looking for it is a futile exercise. We are each free to believe
what we want, and it's my view that the simplest explanation is there is no God. No one created the universe, and no one directs our fate. This leads me to a profound realization. There is probably no heaven and no afterlife either. We have this one life to appreciate the grand design of the universe. And for that, I am extremely grateful.
Right after the Big Bang, the universe was just gas, almost perfectly spread out throughout space. Over the next 200 million years, gravity began to pull the gas back together to produce the very first structures from which everything else would grow. But even this very nearly didn't happen. If it weren't for another stroke of cosmic luck, there would be no you, no me, no stars or planets or anything at all. We know this because in 1982 a group of scientists, including myself, spent 3 solid weeks working it out. Although the calculations were hard, demonstrating what we discovered is easy. First, I need a nice flat floor, like this one, for example. This is the dining room in my college. I'm going to fill the place with lots and lots of ball bearings. These balls represent the matter of the early universe, a thin gas spread out evenly across the vast cosmos. Here's where luck comes in. If they're all the same distance apart, gravity pulls each ball the same amount in all directions. They stay perfectly aligned, and precisely nothing happens. Fortunately, one of the basic rules of the universe is that nothing's perfect. Perfection simply doesn't exist. The early universe had a tiny unevenness that can be simulated by removing just 5 ball bearings. It may not look like much has changed, but to gravity, those missing balls create a giant opportunity. Gravity now pulls more strongly on one side of some of the bearings. The tiny irregularities in the sea of ball bearings have given gravity something to sink its teeth into. And this is exactly what happened back where we left the young universe. Parts of the sea of early gas were ever so slightly thinner than others. The less dense areas were like the gaps between the ball bearings. The denser parts of the sea of gas, where gravity was having its way, clumped together. And it was in these areas that all the stars and galaxies would form. The cosmos had taken its first step towards the beautiful place it is today. All thanks to irregularity, imperfection, a lack of order. So next time someone complains that you have made a mistake,
tell them that may be a good thing, because without imperfection, neither you nor I would exist.
وها هو أشهر الملحدين الذين يعلنون الكفر فرانك كلاوس، أستاذ الفيزياء المشهور والحاصل على وسام الإمبراطورية البريطانية وصاحب الكتاب الشهير العدم، يقر بأن الكون نشأ من العدم، ولكنه يدعي أن العدم ليست معناه العدم المطلق، بل هو وجود. العدم ده وجود يسمى العدم الفيزيائي. العدم الفيزيائي الذي هو أصل العدم الفيزيائي دي يفور بكمات الوحدات اللي هينشأ منها الكون، يفور بكمات تخلق وتهلك في الحال، تطلع وتهلك في خروج على طول، في إيقاع مستمر، خروج وهلاك خروج وهلاك، داخل كله ده العدم الفيزيائي أو الفراغ الفيزيائي. الكمات دي اللي بتطلع وتعدم في الحال في الفراغ الفيزيائي تسمى الكمات النظرية، والتي يمكن أن تتحول إلى كمات يعني وحدات لبنات عملية ينشأ منها كون بديع كما نشاهد.
Yes, my new book, Universe of Nothing, is really describes the revolution in our thinking about some concepts which have been around as long as people have been talking about them, namely nothing and something. The question, why is there something rather than nothing, has been around in one form or another through philosophy and religion for much of human history. And what science has done is change the playing field of those very questions. Because what we've discovered, among other things, is that what most people would consider to be nothing is not only not boring, it's actually a very interesting thing, but actually nothing can become something. In fact, nothing can be unstable. Now, what do I mean by that? we've discovered that empty space, which is for most people nothing, you take a region of space and you get rid of all the particles and all the radiation, so there's nothing there. First of all, we've discovered one of the most amazing things is that if you get rid of everything, that empty space actually weighs something. We don't really even understand why, but we have some inklings because we know, because of quantum mechanics and relativity, at a fundamental level, empty space is a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles that are popping in and out of existence in a time scale so short you can't see them. Now that sounds like philosophy. It sounds like counting angels on the head of a pin, but it's not. Because while we can't see those virtual particles directly, we can see their effects indirectly. In fact, we can calculate their effects, and they affect the properties of atoms in a calculable way. And including those effects has led to the best predictions in all of science. We can compare our theoretical models with observation and get agreement to 9 decimal places. Nowhere else in science can we do that from first principles, predict something to that kind of accuracy, but we only get the right answer if we include the effect of these weird virtual particles. So as crazy as it is, it's true. Now, because of that craziness, it means that empty space can be endowed with properties we wouldn't have imagined before. We still don't get the right answer when we try and calculate the energy of empty space completely in the universe, and it's a big mystery. It's the biggest mystery in all of science. But we know that it can have weird properties. Now, once you add gravity to the mix, and gravity allows things to have negative energy as well as positive energy, then empty space, in which there are no particles, can spontaneously produce particles because you don't violate the conservation of energy. Afterwards, at the beginning you have zero total energy. Afterwards you have zero total energy. But at the beginning you had emptiness. And afterwards you have a universe full of stuff. You and me and this camera and the studio. And it seems like a miracle. But you don't need a miracle to do it. You just need the laws of nature. And in fact, you're guaranteed that if you wait long enough, empty space will produce particles. And so nothing is unstable. So one of the answers to that question, why is there something rather than nothing, is that nothing is unstable. It'd be far more surprising to find nothing than something in some sense, but we wouldn't be here to ask the question if we did. Now, there are many more fascinating aspects of nothing, because it turns out that you might say, and some people do say, that empty space alone isn't nothing. That after all, where did the space come from? And of course, it turns out, as we've been trying to understand the laws of physics and apply quantum mechanics to gravity, that space itself can be a dynamical object. We know in general relativity, space expands and contracts and bends in the presence of matter. And if you make it quantum mechanical, then even space can pop in and out of existence where there was no space before. So you can create whole universes where there was no universe before. And indeed, in that way, you might imagine creating a universe from literally nothing, no space, no time. And these ideas are amazing and fascinating. And we can't prove that we came from nothing that way, but we can show it's plausible. And the fact that it's plausible, that we can have a set of normal physical mechanisms that take us from no space, no particles, to a universe like the one we live in, which has all the characteristics of a universe we might have expected to be created from nothing, to me is one of those amazing stories one can tell, which is why I just told it.
وفي مسك الختام وبالله التوفيق نقول عندما أيقن الكفار من قمم الحضارة العالمية باستحالة أن يخرج من العدم وجود متيقن يترقى إلى هدف غايته الكمال، أيقنوا بحتمية وجود موجود قديم أزلي يشكل الإسناد الأول الذي سموه يا إما بالفراغ الفيزيائي أو سموه بحر أو محيط ديراك. والذي يفوق المحيط ده محيط ديراك، المفترض إنه هو القديم الأزلي، الإسناد الأول اللي منه بيبرز الكون، هذا المحيط ديراك أو الفراغ الفيزيائي. هذا الفراغ أو هذا المحيط يفور بوحدات الكون الأولية التأسيسية التي كما قلنا تبرز من العدم لتهلك في الحال وتسمى الكمات النظرية، والتي تحتاج لقوة من خارجها تحولها إلى كمات عملية يتكون منها ذلك الكون البديع. وهذا التلفيق اللي لفقوه بكفرهم ترتب عليه ضلال كبير وباطل لا تقره العقول السليمة ولا يقره علم اليقين كما يأتي.
Our universe seems to be defined by a set of numbers which in some sense look special. If we had different numbers, we would end up with a sterile universe. People react to this seeming coincidence in a number of ways. You could say it's the outcome of some kind of design or providence. We could say it's a brute fact we have to accept, because these numbers might be determined by some theory which we haven't yet discovered.
For a while it was possible to believe that the laws of nature were not so precisely set as to require the hand of a creator. But then a completely new fundamental property of the universe was discovered. An anti-gravity force present in space itself. It is called the cosmological constant, and when cosmologists calculated its effect on the evolution of the universe, they realized it had to be very finely tuned indeed.
The fine-tunings, how fine-tuned are they? Most of them are 1% sort of things. In other words, if a thing is 1% different, everything is bad. And a physicist could say, maybe those are just luck. On the other hand, this cosmological constant is tuned to 1 part and 10 to the 120, 120 decimal places. Nobody thinks that's accidental. That is not a reasonable idea, that something is tuned to 120 decimal places just by accident. That's the most extreme example of fine-tuning.
No force in the history of cosmology has ever been discovered to be that finely tuned. The cosmological constant needs to be set to 1 part in a trillion, 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 trillion. Otherwise the universe would be so drastically different that it would be impossible for us to evolve. That the cosmological constant arrived at such a tiny value by chance seemed to be out of the question, but the alternative explanation was also impossible to contemplate.
Physicists did not want to accept the idea that the laws of nature might be controlled by well, the benevolence of nature. There should be no reason why the luck should just have it that we can exist. It's too much, it's a stretch. It's much too far to stretch.
It seemed that hidden in the laws of nature was a value so precise that it was impossible to deny that our universe was designed. But a designed universe requires the existence of a designer, a notion that even the anthropic scientists did not want to entertain. It seemed that hidden in the laws of nature was a value so precise that it was impossible to deny that our universe was designed. But a designed universe requires the existence of a designer. The scientists were between a rock and a hard place. Their own discoveries were pointing them towards an intelligent designer.
This is its dislike of mixing religion into physics. I think they were somewhat afraid that if it was admitted that the reason the world is the way it is has to do with our own existence, that could be hijacked by the creationists, by the intelligent designers.
There are physicists who will tell you that if you take about half a dozen physical constants, these are constants that physicists have no explanation for, They just accept that these numbers have the values that they do, and they then do theoretical calculations using their models to say if any one of these half dozen constants was ever so slightly varied, then the universe as we know it would not be possible. For example, if the gravitational constant was a little bit different, there would be no stars, there would be no galaxies, the entire universe would just be a uniform splurge of hydrogen, for example. You wouldn't have stars, you wouldn't have chemistry, you wouldn't have the formation of the heavier elements, you couldn't have life. And they do the same trick for half a dozen other physical constants. A good example is Martin Rees, the present Astronomer Royal, in his book Just Six Numbers. If the constants of the universe are indeed fine-tuned, how do we explain it? How do we explain the appearance that the universe is tuned to bring us into existence? Well, theists say God did it. God twiddled the knobs and tuned the physical constants to have exactly the right values. That, of course, is no explanation at all, because it leaves unexplained the tuner. It's just pushing the problem back one step. So we can instantly discount explanation number one. Explanation number two is adopted by physicists, I think Steven Weinberg, who was quoted earlier in this conference. Steven Weinberg, Nobel Prize-winning physicist from Texas, I think his view is that we don't yet understand enough physics, and when we do, when we have the longed-for theory of everything, the TOE, we will then realize that these knobs are not for tuning. There is no freedom. There are no degrees of freedom. There's only one way for a universe to be. Having accepted the word of physicists that there is an element of fine-tuning, and I've tried to lay out three possible explanations. One would be God, which, as I've said, isn't an explanation at all. One would be the multiverse, and then anthropically, with hindsight, saying we have to be sitting in one of the universes that could give us. But the third one, which I've attributed to you, possibly wrongly, would be what I call the macho physicists, who say, well, it's just that we don't understand why these things are the way they are. One day we will, when we have a theory of everything, it will be understood. But it sounds from our conversation as though that I misrepresented you there.
I don't think one should underestimate the fix we're in, that in the end we will not be able to explain the world, that we will have some set of laws of nature. We will not be able to derive them on the grounds simply of mathematical consistency, because we can already think of mathematically consistent laws that don't describe the world as we know it. And we will always be left with a question, why are the laws of nature what they are rather than some other laws? And I don't see any way out of that. The fact that the constants of nature are suitable for life, which is clearly true, we observe.
The final idea, which I think probably most physicists at least have some time for, is the multiverse theory.
No one has constructed a theory in which that's true. I mean, it's not only a speculation. The theory would be speculative, but we don't have a theory in which that speculation is mathematically realized.
Right, yeah.
So, but it's a possibility.
And the fact that the cancellation is so precise means that the number of universes in the multiverse you need to postulate in order to anthropically be comfortable with it is very, very large.
And it must be at least 10 to the 56, or in fact,
exactly, yeah.
If you think you have some idea about fluctuations at even shorter distances, I think you would say at least 10 to the 120. In fact, that's a little disturbing.
ويرد على ذلك الافتراء عالم الفيزياء الكبير الأستاذ الدكتور محمد باسل الطائي.
صار المسألة الحقيقة كما قلت، الادعاء بأن العدم يخلق نفسه أو يتحول من الفاكيوم فلكتشويشن، يسموها الفاكيوم تقلبات الفراغ أو تقلبات الخلاء، تتحول ذاتيا spontaneously إلى وجود، هذا غير صحيح بدون وجود قوة خارجية. هم يعترفون بضرورة وجود القوة الخارجية، وفي هذه الحالة يعني في حالة الكون هو الجاذبية. ما هي الجاذبية؟ الجاذبية هي تحدب للزمكان، تحدب شديد في الزمكان. منين أجى هذا التحدب بالزمكان؟ لازم في قوة خارجية external agency، يعني إرادة أو قدرة خارجية. إحنا نسميها الله، أنت شو تريد تسميها؟ سميها يا كراوزر.
خاصة أنهم يؤمنون بالبيج بانج.
نحن نعم. يعني فكيف حصل البيج بانج أصلا؟ تحدب شديد في الزمان والمكان. وماذا يعني تحدب الزمان؟
أيوة.
تحدب المكان هاي بسيطة، هاي تحدب مكان، لأن أفرض تحدبت هاي تحدب مكان. ما هو تحدب الزمان؟ تحدب الزمان هو تمطي الزمان، استطالة الزمان. راح أعطيك مثال لطيف.
تلك الوحدات الأولية لا بد وأن تكون مقدرة بعلم وحكمة. تلك الوحدات الأولية لا بد وأن تكون اللي هي بيقولوا الكمات، اللي هي اللبنات الأولى التأسيسية للكون، لا بد وأن تكون هي نفسها مقدرة بعلم وحكمة لتكون صالحة لبناء كون معقد وعظيم. لأن خصائص ذرة الحديد تختلف عن خصائص ذرة الذهب، وتختلف عن خصائص ذرة الكربون والفوسفور والأكسجين والنيتروجين وغير ذلك من الطاقات والقوى التي توجد في تشكيل الطبيعة أو في تشكيل الكون الحادث من العدم. فمن فعل ذلك؟ من قدر ذلك؟ ومن ناحية أخرى تلك الوحدات الأولية التأسيسية التي من صفاتها العطالة والبطالة والعشوائية واللا يقين بحاجة إلى من يحولها إلى صنعة تترقى في أطوار إلى هدف غايته الكمال بظهور ذلك العقل الكوني الراقي الذي يمكنه أن يطل إلى الغيب وكأنه يراه فيؤمن فيوقن بوجود خلاق عظيم هو الإسناد الأول القديم الأزلي الذي لا يحول ولا يزول، خالق كل شيء وهو على كل شيء قدير وله صفات الكمال. ومن صفات كماله أنه واحد أحد حي قيوم محيط عظيم. هذا المحيط العظيم لا وجود لشيء ولا بقاء لشيء ولا حول ولا قوة لشيء إلا به، ولا جهة ينتسب إليها أي شيء إلا في معية المحيط سبحانه، في المحيط. ففروا إلى الله واعبدوه وحده لا شريك له. وهناك الكثير من الدرر على فيس وقناة الدكتور حسين العبيدي، فاحمله مبشرا ليصل إلى الملايين، ولكم أجر عظيم. ولا تنسونا بالدعاء. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.